Ambassador Clickstar of the Galactic Council had seen some weird stuff in his 47 years of diplomatic service. He'd negotiated with gas-based life forms who communicated through flatulence, mediated disputes between silicon-based rock people who measured time in geological epochs, and once spent 3 months on a planet where the dominant species reproduced by aggressively complementing each other. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this moment. Standing on the pristine white floors of humanity's first diplomatic station orbiting Earth, Clickstar watched in absolute horror as Commander Jake Morrison, a human male with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with duct tape and optimism, walked through the airlock with what could only be described as a living nightmare on a leash. "Hey there, Ambassador," Jake said cheerfully, completely oblivious to the fact that Clickstar's 3 hearts had collectively decided to stage a revolt. "Sorry I'm late. Whiskers here needed his morning walk, and you know how it is with big cats, they get cranky if they don't get their exercise." Big cats. Big cats. The creature in question was easily 300 pounds of orange and black striped death, and with teeth that belonged in a museum of prehistoric horrors and eyes that seemed to catalogue every possible way to turn Clickstar into a light snack. According to Clickstar's cultural database, this was a Terran Siberian tiger, apex predator, threat level maximum, recommended engagement protocol, and screaming in the opposite direction while praying to whatever deities might listen. And this human was treating it like, "Who's a good boy?" Jake cooed, dropping to one knee and scratching behind the tiger's ears. "Who's Daddy's little murder machine?" "Yes, you are. Yes, you are." The tiger whiskers. Apparently, because humans had clearly lost all sense of appropriate nomenclature, responded by flopping over on its back and purring like a malfunctioning starship engine. Jake immediately began rubbing its belly while making nonsensical human noises that sounded like a broken translator trying to process a sneeze. Clickstar's antennae twitched violently. In his species, antenna twitching was usually reserved for moments of extreme stress, like when the quarterly diplomatic reports were due, or when someone suggested serving fermented plankton at state dinners. But this was beyond stress. This was beyond his entire understanding of how the universe was supposed to work. "Ambassador?" Jake looked up, still casually petting what was essentially a 4-legged extinction event. "You okay there? You look a little green around greener than usual." That, Clickstar managed, his voice box producing sounds that would have made his language instructors weep, is an apex predator. "Yeah, Whiskers is pretty awesome, isn't he?" Jake beamed with the kind of pride usually reserved for parents showing off their children's crayon drawings. Rescued him from a bad situation when he was just a cub. Now look at him, 200 pounds of pure love. Pure love. The human had just described a creature capable of crushing a small spacecraft as pure love. Clickstar made a mental note to immediately contact the Galactic Council. Either humans had developed some form of mind control technology that put their previous assessments of human technological capability to shame, or they were completely, utterly, significantly insane. Given what he'd observed of human behavior during the preliminary contact phases, both options seemed equally plausible. "Well," Jake said, standing up and brushing tiger hair off his uniform, "should we get started with the diplomatic stuff? Whiskers promises to behave himself. Don't you, big guy?" The tiger yawned, revealing teeth that could probably bite through hull plating, and somehow managed to look bored by the entire proceedings. Clickstar's report was going to break some kind of record for emergency priority classifications. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 14 hours after Clickstar's report hit the quantum communication networks, which was approximately 13 hours and 59 minutes faster than the Council's previous record for emergency response time. The circular chamber buzzed with activity as representatives from 12 species gathered around the holographic display, showing security footage from the diplomatic station. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary life forms," announced Councillor Slimington, whose slug-like appearance perfectly matched his bureaucratic personality. "We are here to address what our xenobiological experts are calling the most significant threat to galactic peace since the Great Tickle War of 2387. General Buzzkill, whose insectoid species had evolved from what humans would recognize as a cross between a praying mantis and a paranoid conspiracy theorist, clicked his mandibles aggressively. Threat? Threat? Council members, we are looking at the complete militarization of apex predatory species. These humans have somehow enslaved creatures that our own worlds abandoned to the wilderness eons ago. Dr. Tentacle Wrangler, the Council's leading expert on predator behavior, adjusted her 7 pairs of glasses simultaneously. The biological implications are staggering. According to our databases, Terran tigers have never shown pack behavior, never demonstrated submission to other species, and certainly never exhibited the kind of. She gestured helplessly at the hologram showing Jake giving Whiskers belly rubs. Affectionate compliance, suggested Counselor Flippers, whose aquatic species communicated through elaborate fin movements that the translation software rendered as perpetual sarcasm. It's impossible. Buzzkill screeched, his wings vibrating with agitation. No species simply adopts apex predators as companions. The evolutionary pressure alone should prevent any form of cross-species bonding. Unless, and his compound eyes widened with horror, unless they've developed some form of neural manipulation technology. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle humming of the life support systems and Slimington's nervous mucus production. You're suggesting, Councillor Crystalberg said slowly, her mineral-based vocal cords grinding like geological processes, that humans have mastered mind control. How else do you explain it? Buzzkill demanded. Look at the footage. That predator is completely submissive to human commands. It responds to vocal cues, displays affectionate behavior, and appears to actively seek human approval. This level of behavioral modification suggests advanced neurocognitive manipulation. Dr. Tentacle Wrangler tentatively raised 3 of her appendages. There might be another explanation. Perhaps humans have developed advanced breeding programs to modify predator behavior over multiple generations. Even worse. Buzzkill shrieked. Genetic manipulation combined with behavioral conditioning. They're creating armies of apex predators programmed for loyalty. A Click-Star, who had been quietly nursing a strong sedative cocktail since arriving, finally spoke up. I observed the human interact with this creature for over an hour. The level of casual familiarity suggests this isn't an isolated incident. This appears to be normal behavior for them. The implications hit the council like a collective slap with a wet fish. Normal? Slimington oozed nervously. You mean there are more of them? According to preliminary scans of human communication networks, Dr. Tentacle Wrangler reported that, consulting her data pad with 6 tentacles, while the 7th nervously adjusted her glasses, references to pets appear in approximately 97% of human households. The silence that followed was the kind of silence usually reserved for moments just before explosions, or just after someone realizes they've accidentally declared war on a heavily armed neighbor. Mission to establish covert observation protocols, Buzzkill announced grimly. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with before these humans decide to expand their predator army beyond their own planet. Seconded, came 12 voices in unison. And so began the most expensive, most elaborate, and most completely unnecessary intelligence operation in galactic history. Dr. Tentacle Wrangler had experienced many challenging moments in her scientific career. She'd studied the mating rituals of energy-based life forms, catalogued the dietary preferences of creatures that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and once spent 6 months trying to explain the concept of photosynthesis to a species that considered sunlight to be a personal insult. But none of that had prepared her for suburbia. Remember, she whispered to her team through their concealed communication devices, we are exchange students from the Andromeda Cultural Institute. Our mission is to observe human predator management techniques without arousing suspicion. Her team consisted of Agent Flipper Fins, whose aquatic species had been fitted with primitive mechanical legs for the mission, and Agent Wing Buzz, Buzzkill's nephew, who suffered from the family tendency toward paranoid overanalysis but lacked his uncle's volume control. They stood at the edge of what humans called Maple Grove Subdivision, a collection of identical housing units that seemed designed by someone who had heard about architecture secondhand and decided to give it a try. The morning air carried strange scents, something the humans called fresh-cut grass, barbecue smoke, and what their translators unhelpfully identified as suburban optimism. Target acquired. Wing buzzed softly, his compound eyes focusing on a house where a small human female was visible through a transparent wall section. Human juvenile appears to be interacting with multiple predatory specimens. Dr. Tentacle Wrangler adjusted her disguise, a combination of holographic projection and strategic tentacle tucking that made her appear almost human-like if you squinted and didn't think too hard about anatomy. The sight that greeted them through the window made her question everything she thought she knew about predator behavior. A human child, no more than 5 years old according to their intelligence briefings, was sitting in the middle of what could only be described as a predator convention. Very massive canines the species humans called Great Danes surrounded her like furry mountains. Two smaller felines perched on elevated surfaces, watching the proceedings with the kind of casual indifference that predators usually reserved for prey they planned to eat later. And somewhere in the background, a colorful avian creature was producing sounds that their translators were refusing to process, though the general tone suggested it had learned some very inappropriate vocabulary. "Sit," the human child commanded. All three Great Danes immediately dropped into identical positions, their massive heads tilted attentively toward their tiny human commander. Dear gods of the deep void, Flipper Fins gurgled through his mechanical breathing apparatus. She's controlling them with verbal commands. They roll over. The largest predator, a creature that could easily overpower most sentient species, immediately flopped onto its back and began wiggling in what appeared to be some form of submission display. "This is worse than we thought," Wing Buzz clicked frantically. "The humans have achieved such complete dominance that the predators actively seek to please them. Look at their behavior, they're competing for the humans' approval." Dr. Tentacle Wrangler made careful notes while fighting off an existential crisis. The child was now dispensing what appeared to be food rewards, and the predators were actually waiting their turn, displaying patience and cooperation that violated every known principle of apex predator behavior. "Good boys," the child announced, and the predators responded with synchronized tail wagging that created a small windstorm in the enclosed space. "The level of behavioral modification is unprecedented," Dr. Tentacle Wrangler muttered, her scientific training warring with her survival instincts. "They've somehow convinced creatures designed for solitary hunting to function as a cooperative unit under human leadership. And look how young the human controller is," Wing Buzz added ominously. "They're training their children in predator management from an early age. This suggests a society-wide military preparation program." The front door of the house opened, and a larger human appeared, presumably the child's parent. "Emma, honey, don't forget to walk Rex before school." The child attached a restraining device to the largest predator and led it outside, hello, where it immediately began following her commands about which direction to travel and where to deposit biological waste. "They've trained them to eliminate on command," Flipper Fins observed with horrified fascination. "The tactical applications are terrifying." Dr. Tentacle Wrangler watched the child and the massive predator walking peacefully down the street. The creature's attention focused entirely on the small human's safety and comfort. Her scientific mind struggled to process what she was seeing, while her survival instincts screamed that they should evacuate the sector immediately. "Phase 1 reconnaissance complete," she reported to Mission Control. "Human predator control capabilities exceed all projections. Recommend immediate escalation to Phase 2 investigation." Back on the council station, General Buzzkill received the report and began mobilizing the Galactic Defense Fleet. The universe was about to become a much more complicated place. The investigation team's second day of reconnaissance began at what humans called a dog park, which Dr. Tentacle Wrangler's preliminary analysis suggested was some kind of mass predator training facility. Her team took positions around the perimeter, carefully documenting what they were convinced was evidence of the most sophisticated military conditioning program in galactic history. Recording commenced. Dr. Tentacle Wrangler noted into her concealed device. Observing approximately 30 specimens of various predatory canine subspecies engaged in what appears to be coordinated tactical exercises. What she was actually watching was a dozen dogs playing fetch with their owners, but her cultural context made this impossible to understand. Note the precision of the retrieval exercises, she continued, watching a golden retriever sprint across the grass to collect a thrown object. The predator responds to projectile launch with immediate pursuit, capture, and return protocols. Speed and accuracy suggest intensive training regimens. Agent Wing Buzz had positioned himself near a group of humans who were discussing their pets with the casual enthusiasm that his paranoid mind interpreted as military briefings. Intelligence gathering in progress, he buzzed softly. Human commanders are sharing tactical information about their specimens. "Oh, Bella is so smart," one human was saying. "She learned to shake hands in just 3 days." "Idetida." "That's nothing," another replied. "Max can play dead on command. Watch this, Max, bang." A German shepherd immediately dropped to the ground and remained motionless. Wing Buzz nearly fainted. Command termination protocols confirmed. He transmitted urgently. Verbal kill commands operational. Meanwhile, Agent Flipper Fins had made his way to what humans called a pet store, which his training had led him to interpret as some kind of predator acquisition and distribution center. The sight that greeted him there challenged every assumption he'd held about civilized behavior. Rows upon rows of creatures were contained in transparent enclosures, clearly being held for purchase by human buyers. The implications were staggering. Not only had humans enslaved apex predators, they had industrialized the process. "This appears to be a predator marketplace," he reported, his mechanical legs carrying him past displays of small mammals, reptiles, and aquatic creatures. Humans are engaged in commercial predator trafficking on a massive scale. A helpful store employee approached him. "Can I help you find anything today? Are you looking for a dog, cat, maybe something more exotic like a parrot or a snake?" Flipper Fins' translation device rendered this as, "Which variety of enslaved predator would you like to purchase for your personal army?" "Just browsing," he managed, while internally calculating the military implications of a society where predator ownership was so casual that retail establishments openly advertised it. Back at Galactic Command, General Buzzkill was pacing his office in increasingly agitated circles as reports flooded in from the reconnaissance team. His paranoid tendencies, which had served him well during the Galactic Wars but made him insufferable at dinner parties, were now operating at maximum capacity. "Council members," he announced during an emergency holographic conference, "the situation is worse than our most pessimistic projections. The humans have developed a complete predator-based military-industrial complex." He activated the holographic display showing footage from the investigation team. Evidence 1. Mass predator training facilities operating openly in civilian areas. Evidence 2. Systematic conditioning programs that achieve complete predator obedience through vocal command protocols. Evidence 3. The commercial predator distribution networks allowing any human citizen to acquire military-grade specimens. Councillor Slimington oozed nervously. "Surely you're not suggesting they're preparing for invasion?" "What else explains this level of predator integration?" Buzzkill demanded. "They've taken the galaxy's most dangerous creatures and turned them into willing collaborators. And they're training their children from birth to command these forces." Dr. Tentacle Wrangler's voice crackled through the communication system. "General, I'm transmitting new footage that you need to see immediately." The hologram updated to show a human family where a small child was commanding a massive predator to perform complex maneuvers, rolling over, sitting, and even balancing food on its nose without eating until given permission. "The level of impulse control they've achieved is unprecedented," Dr. Tentacle Wrangler reported. "This predator is suppressing every natural instinct in favor of human approval." The council chamber fell silent except for the sound of Buzzkill's wings vibrating at frequencies that indicated either extreme agitation or an impending molt. "I'm authorizing defense fleet mobilization," he announced grimly. "If the humans have weaponized predator loyalty to this degree, we cannot allow them to expand beyond their solar system." "Perhaps we should try diplomatic contact first," suggested Councillor Crystalberg. "Diplomacy?" Buzzkill screeched. "With a species that turns apex predators into willing slaves? They're clearly beyond reason. And so, as the Galactic Defense Fleet began powering up their engines and charging their defensive systems, the greatest misunderstanding in interstellar relations continued to spiral toward what promised to be either the most unnecessary war or the most embarrassing diplomatic incident in galactic history. The universe held its breath, waiting to see which it would be. Commander Jake Morrison was having what he considered a perfectly normal Tuesday when his communication console lit up with an urgent message from Galactic Command requesting his immediate presence at the Council chambers for emergency diplomatic intervention regarding species-threatening predator and militarization protocols. "Well, Whiskers," he said to his tiger, who was currently sprawled across 3 chairs in a way that defied both physics and dignity, "sounds like someone's got their antennae in a twist again." What Jake didn't know was that he was walking into what General Buzzkill had dubbed Operation Reveal Truth, which involved surrounding the council chambers with enough firepower to level a small moon, just in case the humans' predator army decided to make an appearance. The moment Jake stepped through the airlock with Whiskers ambling beside him on his leash, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Predator breach. Predator breach. The automated systems announced helpfully. All personnel to emergency stations. Jake said, looking around at the chaos of alien diplomats diving behind furniture and security personnel scrambling for weapons. "Is this about the pet thing again?" General Buzzkill burst from his concealment behind a decorative plant that was probably more valuable than Jake's annual salary. "Human. Explain immediately how you've achieved neural dominance over that apex predator." Jake looked down at Whiskers, who had decided that all the commotion was the perfect time for a nap and had flopped over on his side. "Neural dominance? Dude, I just give him belly rubs and he purrs. It's not exactly rocket science." "Impossible." Dr. Tentacle Wrangler shouted from across the chamber, her 7 pairs of glasses gleaming with scientific fervor. "Our observations clearly demonstrate advanced behavioral conditioning requiring technological intervention." "Behavioral conditioning?" Jake scratched his head. "You mean like teaching him to sit and stay?" Stay? That's just basic training. You give them treats when they do good things, and they learn to do more good things. It's called positive reinforcement." The chamber fell silent except for the sound of Whiskers' contented purring, which was roughly equivalent to a small earthquake on the Richter scale. Councillor Slimington oozed forward cautiously. "You're telling us that you control this predator through snack distribution?" "Well, yeah," Jake said, as if explaining something to a particularly slow child. "At that and scratches behind the ears. Whiskers loves ear scratches. Don't you, big guy?" He reached down and began scratching behind the tiger's ears. Whiskers' purring increased in volume until it was rattling loose objects around the chamber. "But our intelligence reports show humans acquiring predators through commercial transactions." Wing Buzz clicked frantically. "You're buying and selling them." Jake blinked. "You mean pet stores?" "Yeah, people buy pets. Some people adopt them from shelters, some people buy them from breeders, some people rescue them from bad situations. That's how I got Whiskers. He was being kept in terrible conditions by people who didn't understand tiger care." "Tiger care?" Dr. Tentacle Wrangler asked weakly. "Sure. Proper diet, exercise, veterinary attention, mental stimulation, lots of affection. Tigers are actually really social creatures when they're raised right. Aren't you, buddy?" As if to demonstrate, Whiskers rolled over and presented his belly for rubs, making a sound that was part purr, part rumble, and entirely content. "He enjoys your touch?" Clickstar asked, his 3 hearts slowly returning to normal rhythm. "Of course he does. We've been together for 8 years. He's family." Jake's voice carried the kind of simple sincerity that was impossible to fake. "Look, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. Humans don't control predators. We befriend them." "Befriend?" General Buzzkill's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Yeah, like we take care of them. They provide companionship. It's a mutually beneficial relationship based on affection and trust." Jake sat down on the floor, and Whiskers immediately crawled over to rest his massive head in Jake's lap. "Dogs evolved alongside humans over thousands of years. Cats basically domesticated themselves because they figured out we'd feed them. And big cats like Whiskers, well, they're not that different from house cats, just bigger. Dr. Tentacle Wrangler stared at the scene before her, a human casually petting a creature that could kill him with a swipe of its paw, while that same creature dozed peacefully in complete trust. The behavioral modifications we observed, she said slowly, they're not the result of technological manipulation. Nope, just love, patience, and a really good understanding of animal psychology. Jake grinned. Plus lots of high-quality meat and the occasional ice cream cone. Whiskers has a thing for vanilla. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs when an entire worldview collapses and rebuilds itself in the space of 30 seconds. So, Councillor Flippers said finally, you're telling us that humans have achieved interspecies harmony through kindness and snacks, Jake added helpfully. Never underestimate the power of good snacks. General Buzzkill slowly lowered his weapon, his compound eyes reflecting something that might have been wonder or might have been an impending nervous breakdown. We may have slightly overreacted, he admitted. 6 months after what historians would later record as the Great Pet Panic of 2387, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Galactic Council chambers, once a sterile monument to bureaucratic efficiency, it now resembled something between a diplomatic meeting and the universe's most diverse pet adoption fair. Ambassador Clickstar, whose 3 hearts had finally adjusted to the regular presence of apex predators, sat in his designated chair with a small, angry-looking creature perched on his lap. Enowain, Moslo. The creature was a chihuahua named Napoleon, who, despite weighing less than most council members' lunch, had somehow established dominance over every visiting dignitary through sheer force of personality and strategic ankle biting. The motion to establish universal pet therapy programs has been approved by unanimous vote, Clickstar announced, trying to maintain diplomatic dignity while Napoleon glared menacingly at a visiting trade representative who had made the mistake of reaching for a briefcase too quickly. Across the chamber, General Buzzkill was engaged in what could only be described as an existential crisis. His paranoid worldview had been so thoroughly shattered by exposure to human-pet relationships that he'd undergone what his species called perspective molting, a psychological process usually reserved for major life transitions like career changes, or accepting that your offspring had decided to become interpretive dancers. The Defense Fleet reports successful integration of emotional support animals across all vessels, he announced, his voice carrying none of its former aggressive certainty. Morale has increased by 300%, and interdisciplinary conflicts have decreased by 97%. This remarkable transformation was largely due to the golden retriever puppy currently asleep across his thorax. The puppy, named Commander Fluffington by the fleet personnel, had achieved what decades of military discipline had failed to accomplish, teaching General Buzzkill how to relax. Dr. Tentacle Wrangler, meanwhile, had thrown herself into pet research with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered an entirely new branch of science. Her latest paper, Interspecies Emotional Bonding, a comprehensive analysis of human-animal symbiosis, had become required reading at universities across 17 star systems. The preliminary results from the Betazoid feline compatibility study are fascinating, she reported, adjusting 6 pairs of glasses while her 7th tentacle scratched behind the ears of a Maine Coon cat named Professor Whiskers. It appears that telepathic species form even stronger bonds with Earth cats, possibly due to the cat's natural psychic resilience. Councillor Slimington, whose slug-like physiology had initially seemed incompatible with pet ownership, had surprised everyone by becoming the galaxy's leading advocate for aquatic pet integration. His office now featured an elaborate aquarium system housing what humans called goldfish. Though their ability to reduce his stress-induced mucus production had made them more valuable than their Earth name suggested. The Department of Interspecies Companionship reports that pet adoption requests have exceeded capacity by 4,000%, he announced with obvious pride. We've had to establish a waiting list. But the most dramatic transformation belonged to Commander Jake Morrison, who had gone from simple diplomatic officer to the galaxy's first director of interspecies companionship. His office, located in the heart of the Galactic Council complex, had become a pilgrimage site for beings seeking to understand the mysterious human art of pet care. The thing is, Jake explained to his latest group of visitors, a delegation from the Crystalline Confederation, who were interested in adopting Earth hamsters, it's not about control or domination. It's about partnership. When you open your heart to another species, you're not just gaining a pet. You're gaining a family member who happens to have fur or scales, or in your case, probably some kind of mineral coating. Whiskers, now officially designated as cultural ambassador to the galaxy, demonstrated this principle by graciously allowing the crystal beings to pet his fur, despite their slightly abrasive surface texture. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. The Galactic Insurance Commission had needed to create entirely new categories for property damage caused by overenthusiastic tail wagging, and the Universal Translation Service had struggled to develop appropriate renderings for sounds like "who's a good boy" in languages that didn't have concepts for either goodness or boyhood. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. A galaxy that had spent millennia focused on technological advancement, military might, and bureaucratic efficiency had discovered something that humans had known all along: sometimes the most important relationships couldn't be quantified, categorized, or controlled. They could only be loved. You know, Clickstar mused during a quiet moment between sessions, while Napoleon dozed in his lap and the various council members tended to their own adopted companions. But when we first encountered humans, we thought they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. We were right, Jake replied with a grin, watching as General Buzz Killbaby talked to Commander Fluffington in what had once been the galaxy's most feared military voice. We just misunderstood what kind of dangerous we were. What do you mean? Jake gestured around the chamber, where the most powerful beings in the galaxy were united not by fear or political necessity, but by the simple joy of scratching behind ears and dispensing treats. We're dangerously good at making friends. And as if to prove his point, Napoleon opened one eye, assessed the diplomatic situation, and decided that Clickstar's lap was acceptable for continued napping. The universe's smallest dictator had spoken, and peace reigned supreme. The galaxy had learned to love, one belly rub at a time.